All right, I am now at lecture 4.3, which is the third section about this first Michael Herr lecture, which is called Creating News. And creating news is one of these strange things because we now live in a world where it's normal for people, as I said a few minutes ago in 4.2, for people to self-brand, and you're creating not a static profile of who you were a year ago, your CV, but a dynamic profile, which is that standard where you're looking for likes, you're looking for retweets, and you're trying to drive traffic to your site or whoever, whatever your site is. It might be you or the site. For click-through traffic and all this self-propelled sort of self-operating media enterprise that we're all told is our job. This is our job to do, as opposed to actually having an actual job that where you actually do things other than make yourself look great. I suppose that's the job. This is just a performance of the self. Except you're not really just performing the self, right? You have to perform somebody who is more interesting than just you. It has to be, yeah. Anyway, but in the 1960s, this just didn't exist. None of this stuff existed. Right? It's it's just the idea that when people turned on cameras, everybody else changed was understood, and that's partly what McLuhan was pointing to. Partly is that electronic media, fast-moving electronic media, which is not as fast as we expect to have now, where it's instantaneous, basically. We knew that people change. I mean, it was one of these sort of sociological things where people began to say, wait a second, when people turn on cameras, other people start behaving differently. Why is that? So the people who were quoted on camera, especially because that was the big time. If you reached television, that was considered to be the big time. Were usually politicians or celebrities or both, or they were the very wealthy. And often, again, those overlapped. Celebrity, very wealthy; politician, very wealthy. Most people were mentioned in the paper maybe twice in their lives at the most, when they were born and when they died. Maybe when they were married, maybe. It cost money to take a 2-line notice that you were getting married or you were having a baby. But having a baby meant that you were not really mentioning yourself, you're mentioning your kid, the birth of your kid, right? To have cameras and cameramen, and again, very rarely camera women, especially in war zones. There's not that there weren't any, but there were very few. Show up meant that something important was about to happen, and the cameras, the press was somehow going to witness this, and in witnessing it was indicating this is important. It's like pointing a big red arrow to something that's going to happen and say, whatever happens in this space is going to be, something, history is being made as we watch. And people who mattered and who had power, real power, were going to appear, and they were going to say important things that were worthwhile. These were photo ops of the sort of in the original sense of the word, but they were it was an opportunity to, hang on a second. That's an opportunity to make the digital media work properly. This was an opportunity to basically be, as a normal person like me, to be a witness to history. Okay. Now, if we translate this all to the battlefield, it's like, well, if you have reporters show up on the battlefield, it's like, what's going to happen? If you have one lone reporter who shows up to an outfit, let's say, and when they call an outfit here, we're talking about an actual unit. So the Americal Division, or the 25th Infantry or something like that. If it was a company or larger, so, a couple of thousand men, a group like that can absorb a reporter or two and just like, oh yeah, and the reporter might interview people and might take some pictures, and people are like, oh, that's nice. They like it. It's like, oh yeah, take my picture. There's a wonderful scene of this in Full Metal Jacket where Stars and Stripes, because Joker and Rafterman are reporters for Stars and Stripes, and so they show up at this massacre site. And the guy who gives them the report, Lieutenant Cleese, smiles every time thinks he's having his picture taken, and then he looks at and then meanwhile he tells the story of what happens to the, the Vietnamese who've been slaughtered. There's this amazing, brutally Stanley Kubrickian, darkly humorous moment where there's just he's untouched by this dreadful thing that happened. He's like, oh yeah, that's but don't get my good side. Get a good picture of me. So, but that's when one thing happens. You can absorb, a company of 1,000 men or even 120 men, can 120, 200 men can absorb sort of one guy appearing. But when 6 reporters appear at one time, everybody's like, what's going to happen? What is about to happen to us? Because maybe they know something we don't know, because they're plugged in, right? They're more likely to be around the brass, that is, be around people who have brass on their hats, which means that they are making decisions. They're captains, they're colonels, captains, majors, colonels, generals, potentially. So they would know. So on page 190 to 191, Herr says, but when 6 correspondents turned up on the eve of an operation, especially when it fell during a long period of light contact, and so there hasn't been a lot of contact between the enemy and Americans, the effect was so complicated that the abiding ambivalence of all troops and commanders toward all reporters didn't even begin to explain it. Everyone from the colonel to the lowest ranking grunt felt a new importance about what he was doing. Okay, so let's go back to this, right? Because this is the thing with this language is you got to take it slowly. You got to metabolize this stuff, So he says, when 6 correspondents turned up on the eve of an operation, okay, and there hasn't been anything. So what do these guys know, right? That nobody else knows. The effect is so complicated that the abiding ambivalence. So all troops are always like reporters, it's a love-hate relationship. They're not sure about them. They're ambivalent about reporters. Do they like them? Are they okay? Do you trust them? Like if an Instagrammer suddenly shows up in your face, you're like, could you not do that? This is my life you're taking pictures of and you're going to post on your, with your 7,000 likes and blech. Like get out of my face. You're destroying my privacy and so on. Well, what if 6 Instagrammers show up around you and they start pointing cameras at you or their phones at you? You're like, wait a second, what's about to happen to me that I don't know, right? So you're ambivalent. I'm certainly ambivalent. People start taking pictures of me. I'm like, could you not do that? Could you go somewhere else and take your pictures? So as he says, the ambivalence of all troops and commanders. So the commanders are like, is this going to make us look good? Like, what if the thing goes wrong? What if it goes bad? Then we'll be all over we could ruin our career, if we're seen doing the wrong things. And that's true. It can ruin your career. Like the politician recently who said, I wouldn't be here to mourn the death of an African American if I didn't have an election this term. Right. It's like, oh, there's the truth, but an open mic caught it, and that guy may be fried. Which would be fine with me. Let's fry him. Everyone from the colonel to the lowest ranking grunt felt new importance. It's like you begin to think, well, wait a minute, maybe I'm doing something good. This is about to be great. They're going to make me famous. What Herr sees is what physicist Werner Heisenberg calls the observer effect. And where if you are in the situation, just being there and seeing things changes things, right? And this is very important for media studies. You cannot be on the scene with the camera or without a camera, even without now the thousands of selfies that your people are going to take and pictures you think would inoculate us to the effects of a camera. Still, if somebody starts taking pictures, it's going to change our behavior. This is the way human beings are. And Herr considers what some 25 years, because this is basically from America's entry into World War II, which is 1941, right, Pearl Harbor, December 1941, to the mid-1960s. So he's looking at, what's 25 years of Hollywood? What effect has this had on these young men? Because after all, they were teens, right? And they're 18 and 19. So they love movies. They go to the movies all the time, like everybody does. And these Hollywood war films, which have big famous people in them at the time, people that you may or may not know. It depends on whether or not your dad made you watch war films. So sometimes there's somebody whose dad, makes them sit down and watch war films. So it's like, so they're used to John Wayne war films and Randolph Scott and Gary Cooper and, the usual sort of string of quiet, slow talking, in control men who may be killed heroically on the battlefield, but always redeem themselves. William Holden and so on. And you see all these war films. Well, this is how they learn to behave in war, because Hollywood was the model for war films, and it still is, really. I mean, it's shifted a little bit because of the streaming services, but the idea is still the same, that you still are shown how to model what masculinity is, and for that matter, what it is to be a woman at war is also modeled that way. Women are supposed to be just as tough. They're supposed to be Charlize Theron and Lucy Liu and what's her face? You know who I'm talking about. Basically, any female action star, from underworld to whatever it is, to the most recent horror movie with Sandra Bullock or Emily Blunt. It's all the same stuff, basically. Jennifer Garner and Alias. This is how to be a tough gal. This is what a tough gal looks like. This is how a tough gal kicks ass. It's like, okay. So it's all modeling. It's like, it's not as though it's shifted because women are suddenly now allowed at war. They're like, yeah, okay, you're a woman at war. Here, you got to have good looking. You got to be good looking. You got to look like a dancer. And if you can't hack a 50-pound pack, don't worry about that. It's a movie. So he says, I keep thinking about all the kids who got wiped out by 17 years of war movies before coming to Vietnam to get wiped out for good. All right. So it's like they've seen all these war movies. And then they come to Vietnam and they try to model that behavior. But it's not a war movie. It's war. You don't know what a media freak is until you've seen the way a few of these grunts would run around during a fight when they knew there was a television crew nearby. They were actually making war movies in their heads, doing little guts and glory leatherneck tap dances under fire, getting their pimples shot off for the networks on 209. So this guts and glory leatherneck, a leatherneck is a Marine. This is one of these things that sort of gets passed down from the Marine Corps history. And so they're doing this guts and glory, no guts, no glory. That's Patton, George Patton, George Patton. Yeah, I think that's right. Jesus, now I've forgotten George Patton. Now I've forgotten Patton's first name. I'm thinking George C. Scott is General Patton. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it's George. Yeah, George Patton. Yeah, George C. Scott plays. Anyway, sorry. So, but basically, we've been bathed in the media, and this generation has been bathed in the media like any other, but it's persistent more than anything else. And they're seeing these war movies on television. And we're still paying attention to how to perform and how to be a hero and how to be a combatant. And so Herr points out that two things come out of this. The first thing is that popular culture instructs us how to behave, how to perform masculinity, femininity, whether it's femininity at war, heroism, whiteness, blackness, heterosexuality, queerness. All this stuff is going to be modeled, and you're shown how to perform it during wartime. And nobody gets out of that alive. I mean, propaganda is propaganda. I don't care who it's for. If somebody says, but they're showing, queer people at war, that's good for queer people. I'm like, is it good for queer people if they're being shot and they're fighting in a cause which is unjust because they were told to do that by a government that they don't trust and don't know, but they just basically followed the rules and they followed instructions to just go and do it? That's good for queer people. Okay, I'm not sure how that is. I mean, I guess it's empowering, quote unquote. The second thing is that if you're a reporter and you know that the power of your camera or just your presence has on people, then that makes you complicit in their story. So when you show up, your responsibility goes up, right? Because that means that you may get young people killed, 18-year-olds or 17-year-olds who have never seen a camera before, have never seen people taking pictures of them before, who have an inflated belief about what being famous is, because we somehow seem to believe that being famous is the answer to all of our problems. I'm not really sure why, but anyway, when you show up with a camera, or even worse, with a film camera where you're taking actual film of a scene, you may be killing people. because people may run around to do things which gets them killed. There's no way around it, says Herr on 228. If you photograph a dead Marine with a poncho over his face and got something for it, that is, you got money for it or an award, you were some kind of parasite. But what were you if you pulled the poncho back first to make a better shot and did that in front of his friends? Some other kind of parasite, I suppose. So you're complicit. What Herr points to with these issues is that his colleagues, as he calls them in this section about colleagues, is that you cannot actually, they either will not or cannot be allowed to report on what they actually see. They're told a story by the American military, which has a very sophisticated public affairs machine. By this time, it's fully rolling. I mean, they know exactly the kind of stories they want to get. That's why they're running the Stars and Stripes, which they have been doing by this time for decades. And they're going to report on that. So what else does this say about the complicity of the reporter or the correspondent? And this is where we must go next.